A reclusive millionaire on a solo jungle retreat for healing ends up face-to-face with a raging tiger. But just when death seemed inches away, two homeless strangers with nothing but broken pasts and raw instincts emerge from the shadows, and what they do next flips his world upside down. Forever. Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss any update in future. The jungle was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that holds its breath before something terrible happens. Leaves rustled faintly, but it wasn't the wind. Something moved. Eyes watching from behind thick brush. And standing in the middle of that vast, tense green was a man who had never felt smaller in his life. He was Michael Carver, billionaire, CEO, known for skyscrapers, scandal, and solitude. But right now, none of that mattered. His white linen shirt clung to his back, soaked in sweat and fear. His breath hitched as he turned slowly, instinct crawling up his spine. There it was, the tiger. Its eyes locked onto his, golden and primal. Muscles coiled like springs beneath the animal's stripes. It didn't growl. It didn't roar. It just watched. Calm. Calculated. Waiting. Then it took one step forward. Michael's knees nearly buckled. Just 2 days ago, he was sitting inside a glass tower, yelling at interns and pretending his heart wasn't empty. Just 2 days ago, he didn't care if he lived or died. And now he desperately wanted to live. But that moment, that terrifying moment, didn't just begin with the tiger. It began 3 days earlier, when Michael's private jet touched down near a remote wildlife reserve in India. He told no one. No security. No staff. Just a week away from everything, away from stockholders, lawyers, and the echoing silence of his penthouse suite. He wanted to disappear. He didn't expect to meet them. On his second night, after wandering too far from his resort, he took a wrong trail. He didn't notice the sun had dipped beneath the tree line, or that his phone had lost signal hours ago. By the time he realized he was lost, the jungle was already swallowing the light. And that's when he saw them. Two figures, crouched near a fire made of scraps and branches. Dirty clothes, skin tanned by hardship, eyes alert like wild animals. Homeless, clearly, but not local. Not beggars either. These men moved like survivors. Michael stepped closer, trying to speak, but stumbled on a root. They turned fast, one grabbed a stick, the other raised a hand. Then their eyes adjusted to his face. He expected them to demand money. But they didn't. The older one, around 50, lowered his hand. His voice was hoarse but calm. "You don't belong here." Michael scoffed. "Neither do you." The younger man, no older than 30, smirked but said nothing. He had a scar down his cheek and a hardness in his stare that only came from witnessing too much pain. They didn't ask who he was. Didn't beg. Didn't care. Michael sat by their fire that night. He didn't know why. Maybe because they didn't look at him like a billionaire. Maybe because they didn't try to impress or exploit him. Maybe because, in their silence, he saw himself. They shared stale bread and boiled roots. Michael shared nothing. But he listened to their short, clipped stories. The older one, his name was Raj, had once been a ranger before corruption cost him everything. The younger, Ravi, had no family left after a dam collapse washed away his entire village. They didn't tell these stories for sympathy. They spoke like men who had already made peace with pain. By morning, Michael offered them cash. Raj refused. "Money's no good here." Then Ravi added, "You can't bribe the jungle." Michael left. But something in their eyes stayed with him. On the third day, he wandered again. Maybe on purpose. Maybe hoping he'd find them again. Or maybe just hoping to feel something real. And that's when the tiger appeared. Not from a zoo. Not behind bars. Real. Raw. Inches away from death. He couldn't scream. Couldn't move. Time split into fragments. The tiger's shoulder tensed. It was going to pounce. And then, a scream tore through the trees. Not from Michael. From behind him. Ravi. The younger homeless man hurled a flaming branch directly between Michael and the tiger. The fire didn't scare the beast, it enraged it. It let out a bone-shaking roar and turned toward the threat. Ravi didn't run. Michael turned in disbelief. Ravi's voice was firm. Don't move. It smells fear. From the other side, Raj appeared with something in his hand, spice powder. Maybe he flung it wide into the air. The particles caught the wind, irritating the tiger's eyes. It blinked, snarled, then miraculously backed off, retreating into the jungle. Michael dropped to the ground, gasping, shaking. They had saved him. They didn't owe him anything. They could have left him there, could have watched him die. And yet, Michael whispered, "Why?" Ravi didn't answer. But Raj looked down and said, "Not all life is weighed by bank accounts." Michael wanted to speak, apologize, offer them everything he had. But they were already walking away, back into the jungle, leaving him with nothing but a shattered ego and a life he now owed. He never knew what became of them. But that night, when Michael finally found his way back to the resort, he wasn't the same man anymore. Not even close. And this was only the beginning. Back at the resort, Michael sat under the sterile light of his villa's porch, still trembling. His clothes were torn, caked in sweat and jungle dust, but none of that mattered. His mind was somewhere deeper in that clearing, frozen in time, where two men with nothing had saved him from becoming prey. He couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because something inside him had cracked. For years, he'd built walls of concrete, steel, and money. He thought they protected him. But it turned out they'd only trapped him. And somehow, two strangers with no address, no business cards, and no agenda had set him free. By morning, he asked for the local ranger unit. There were two men in the forest, he told the officer. "I want to help them. I owe them my life." The ranger raised a brow. "You saw people in Sector 9? "Yes. There's nothing there but ruins. That area's been abandoned since the floods." Michael insisted. "Sent drones. Scent trackers. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of fire." It was as if Raj and Ravi had melted back into the earth. That haunted him. So he stayed. What was supposed to be a 3-day escape stretched into 2 weeks. He canceled meetings, ignored board emails. His team was confused. Investors were panicking. But Michael didn't care. Something bigger was calling. He began exploring deeper into the forest, with guides this time. Searching not just for them, but for the reason why their faces wouldn't leave his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ravi standing firm in front of the tiger. He saw Raj with his weathered hands flinging spice into the wind like a forgotten warrior. He had to know more. One evening, as the sun dipped into gold, an old herbalist from a nearby village approached Michael at the local temple. "You're the man who saw the jungle spirits, yes?" Michael blinked. "What?" The herbalist smiled. "The protector and the shadow. The one with the fire in his hand and the one with a heart like stone." Michael's voice dropped. "You know them?" The old man nodded slowly. "They come and go. Not many see them. Fewer live to tell." He explained that many believed Raj and Ravi were ghosts of the forest, lost souls who once lived, died, and returned to protect those the jungle chose not to kill. Stories of them saving children from landslides, pulling wounded tourists from snake pits, even scaring off poachers with only torches and bare hands. Michael didn't know what to believe. Ghosts? Guardians? Or just men with stories too painful to carry in civilization? He couldn't let it go. He started talking to locals, offering food and medicine to nearby villages, asking for any clues about two homeless men living off the land. And slowly, pieces began to form. A temple caretaker whispered that he'd seen Raj over a decade ago, an honest forest ranger who challenged a mining company that wanted to destroy acres of sacred ground. They burned his hut, killed his brother, and the system turned its back. So Raj disappeared. Ravi's tale was murkier. No one knew where he came from. But one woman, an old widow, said he'd once saved her grandson from drowning during the floods, then vanished before she could thank him. "He moves like the wind," she said. "You never see him coming, but you feel the change when he's gone." Michael sat with those words for a long time. He thought about all the deals he had crushed, the people he had silenced in boardrooms, the lives his company had uprooted in the name of progress. He'd spent decades building an empire on profit margins and public relations, while men like Raj and Ravi were buried beneath the mud of the forgotten. And yet, when it mattered most, they had saved him. Not for headlines, not for reward, but because that's what they did. One night, unable to hold the weight any longer, Michael wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular, just to the jungle, to the fire, to the memory. He wrote about his mistakes, about his loneliness, about how he'd mistaken power for purpose. And then he did something he never thought he'd do. He left his villa, walked to the edge of the forest, and placed the letter at the base of an old tree, the same tree he remembered seeing behind Ravi that day. The air was still, the night quiet. He whispered, "Thank you," and turned to leave. But then a crack in the brush. He froze. A shadow moved between trees. Not a tiger this time, not a spirit either, but a man. A silhouette, tall and still. Watching. Michael didn't speak. The figure gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, then disappeared again into the dark. Was it him? Ravi? He didn't know. And maybe that was the point. Michael returned to the city a changed man. Not loud, not dramatic, but inwardly shifted, like a river that quietly changes its course. He shut down 2 of his most destructive mining operations, started a new foundation focused on preserving forest reserves and indigenous rights. He named it the Raj and Ravi Trust. Every year, he returned to that jungle, not with drones or staff or ego, just with a heart more open than the last time. He never saw them again, but somehow he always felt them. And that presence, that silent echo, would shape the next chapter of his life more than all the millions ever had. 3 years passed. The world spun forward like it always does. Stock markets rose and crashed, news cycles churned, cities grew louder. But Michael Carver was no longer part of that chaos. He still wore suits, tailored and dark, but now they didn't define him. The shine in his shoes had faded, not from neglect, but from walking unfamiliar roads. His voice was softer now, though when he spoke, people leaned in not out of fear, but respect. His empire still stood, but its roots were different. Stronger. Human. The Raj and Ravi Trust had expanded quietly across 3 continents, building eco-villages, funding rescue operations, supporting survivors of natural disasters, and most importantly, listening. Listening to the voices that cities tried to silence. Forgotten voices, like the ones that had once saved his life. But no matter how far his work reached, Michael returned to the same forest every year. Same trail, same tree, same silence. He never saw them again. Still, he brought offerings. Not flowers, not gold, but food for wanderers. Water canisters hung in trees. Survival kits buried in marked spots. He called them hope points. Places where someone, someday, lost and alone, might find a second chance. That winter, something changed. Michael received a call from a remote health clinic deep in a coastal province, one he had helped build through the trust. A man had been brought in, unconscious, starved, feverish. The only thing in his pocket was a torn envelope. Inside it was Michael's old letter, the one he'd left under the tree. He flew out that night. When he arrived, the man was still in critical care. Dehydrated. His skin was weathered like dried leather, lips cracked, bones pressing sharply against skin. But Michael recognized him. Raj. Time had stolen some of his strength, but not his eyes. They still held the weight of 1,000 storms. As he regained consciousness, the first thing he asked wasn't where he was. It was, "Did the tiger get you?" Michael choked on a laugh and wiped his eyes. "No, you did." Raj smiled faintly. "Good." Over the next week, Raj recovered slowly. He didn't speak much. Never did. But Michael stayed beside him. Day and night. Like a son beside his father. Like guilt beside grace. On the 5th day, Raj whispered something. "He's gone." Michael leaned in. "Who?" "Ravi." Silence pressed between them. He was trying to save a girl. In the floods. The rope snapped. He didn't make it out. Michael's heart caved. A breath left him that he hadn't realized he'd been holding since that day in the jungle. He thought they were invincible. He wanted them to be. Raj continued. He believed in people, even when he had nothing. He said the world needed reminders. Michael nodded slowly. He was one. Raj closed his eyes. So are you now? That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He stepped outside the clinic, stars sharp above, air thick with silence. He thought about Ravi, about sacrifice, about how some people are born not to live long lives, but to leave deep ones. And then, he made a decision. When Raj was strong enough to travel, Michael brought him back to the city. Not as a charity case, not as a symbol, but as a partner. He gave him a role no one else could fill, guardian director of the trust. Raj's job wasn't to attend meetings or review spreadsheets. His job was simple, to remind the board what it means to bleed for a stranger, to fight for invisible lives, to never forget the forest, even in the boardroom. And Raj did it well. His presence alone shifted rooms. He'd walk in with his rough clothes and rougher voice, and the most polished executives would sit straighter, listen harder, speak less. A year later, Michael launched a new program under the trust, Project Ravi. It focused on training young adults in survival skills, empathy-led leadership, and human-first thinking. Not just to build resumes, but to build people who didn't flinch when the tiger appeared. People who'd stand between danger and innocence. Just like Ravi had. They taught in villages, refugee shelters, burned forests, war zones. And every graduate received a patch, stitched with Ravi's silhouette, standing with fire in hand, facing the impossible. And one by one, those patches began to spread. On backpacks in Brazil, on uniforms in Indonesia, on jackets in Kenya. Stories poured in. A boy in Peru used his training to pull a drowning child from a swollen river. A girl in Pakistan defused a violent mob using only words and courage. An orphan in Syria who'd once given up on life, now teaching other children how to survive. Every story ended with the same phrase. I just remembered Ravi. And somewhere, quietly, Michael would close his eyes and smile. But success was never the end of the story. Because real stories, the ones that matter, don't end. They ripple. One evening, years later, Michael returned to the same jungle trail. Older now, grayer, slower. He reached the tree, the one where it all began. He knelt down, touched the bark, whispered, "Thank you." And then, from the shadows, a soft voice behind him. "You came back." He turned. A young man, barefoot, hair wild, eyes familiar. Michael stood. His breath caught. "You knew him?" The boy nodded. "He saved my father during the floods." Michael's voice broke. "What's your name?" "Arun." Michael smiled. "You want to help people, Arun?" The boy's eyes lit up. More than anything, Michael took off his jacket, reached into the inner pocket, and handed him a patch. The fire. The silhouette. The beginning of something new. He placed it in Arun's palm and said only 5 words. Words that had once changed his life. Not all heroes wear shoes. And as the sun fell behind the trees, 2 silhouettes stood side by side, one starting a story and the other, finally at peace. True heroes are not always the ones with power, fame, or fortune. Sometimes, those who have lost everything still choose to give everything. Compassion, courage, and sacrifice don't require wealth, they require heart. And a single act of kindness from someone society ignores can change the course of another person's entire life. Because when the world forgets you, but you still choose to protect it, that's not weakness. That's greatness.